We're going to continue talking about chemical reactions, and now we are going to deal with the net ionic equations, or NIE. A net ionic equation can be written when you're dealing with what is called an aqueous reaction, or reactions that occur in water, but the water is not part of the reaction. So let's start with some definitions. We talk about solutions. Solutions is a homogeneous mixture, usually in the liquid state, where one thing is dissolved in something else. The compound which does the dissolving is called the solvent. In an aqueous solution, water is the solvent. The solute is that which is dissolved. Electrolytes are ionic compounds which, if they dissolve, will dissociate into their component ions. A non-electrolyte is a covalent or a non-ionic compound, and it does not dissociate when dissolved. So, once again, in an aqueous ionic solution, the electrolyte will dissociate into its constituent ions. So, for example, take solid sodium chloride. It has a crystal structure, as you see here. When you put it in water, the water molecules will surround the ions, separating them out, so we can say we now have sodium and chloride ions floating around in the solution. And the equation is written like this. The compound breaks down into its constituent parts. Copper 2 sulfate becomes copper 2 plus sulfate ions. Sucrose or table sugar, when dissolved, since it is covalent, does not ionize. So the top two are electrolytes, the bottom one is a non-electrolyte. So let's take this equation. Aqueous lead 2 nitrate plus potassium iodide becomes lead 2 iodide and potassium nitrate. That, as you recall, is the complete molecular equation. Now, because these are an aqueous solutions, they will dissociate into their constituent ions. Solids, liquids, and gases do not dissociate. Only aqueous dissociates. So you can rewrite the equation like this, breaking the aqueous ionic compounds into their constituent ions. Lead 2 plus 2 nitrates plus 2 potassiums plus 2 iodides becomes solid lead 2 iodide plus potassium plus nitrate. This is called the complete ionic equation because it shows all of the ions. However, you'll notice on both sides of the arrow you have 2 K plus 1 pluses and 2 NO3 1 minuses. So they can cancel out. What you're left with, Pb2 plus 2I minus becomes solid lead 2 iodide, is called the net ionic equation, abbreviated NIE. Now here, potassium and nitrate are called spectator ions because they don't participate in the reaction per se. If you have the same ion exactly and the same number on both sides of the arrow, they can cancel out. Spectator ions do not show up in the NIE, and it turns out that group 1 ions, ammonium, and nitrate, when part of aqueous compounds, are spectator ions, and they will totally cancel out if you have the same number on both sides. Also, when you balance a net ionic equation, not only must the number of atoms balance, but the overall net charge must also balance. So here's another example. You're going to allow solid zinc to react with aqueous copper 2 chloride. It'll form solid copper and aqueous zinc chloride. What's the net ionic equation? Start with the molecular equation, which is written like this. Now you're going to write the complete ionic equation. The solid zinc and the solid copper do not ionize. The other two will. So you end up with an equation that looks like this. The chlorines are the same on both sides, so they cancel out, and you're left with the net ionic equation, which looks like this. 1 zinc on both sides, 1 copper on both sides, and the net charge on the reactant side is 2 plus, the net charge on the product side is 2 plus, totally balanced. So now one for you. Solid sodium carbonate reacts with aqueous hydrochloric acid, HCl will totally dissociate, and it forms aqueous sodium chloride, gaseous carbon dioxide, and liquid water. What's the net ionic equation? Stop, come up with your answer. I'll give it to you, then walk through it. Go. And this is the net ionic equation. Start with the molecular reaction. Solid sodium carbonate plus hydrochloric acid becomes sodium chloride, carbon dioxide, and water. The complete ionic reaction. The sodium carbonate does not dissociate. The hydrochloric acid does. The sodium chloride does because it's aqueous, but gaseous carbon dioxide and liquid water do not dissociate. The only spectator ion are the chlorines, so they cancel out. So now you can write the net ionic equation, which looks like this. So to review, when made into an aqueous solution, ionic compounds will dissociate into their constituent ions. Solids, liquids, and gases do not dissociate. The net ionic equation only lists the compounds which react. Ions which appear exactly the same on both sides of the arrow are called spectator ions and do not appear in the net ionic equation. And don't forget that group 1 cations, ammonium, and nitrate will always be spectator ions. When you have balanced the net ionic equation, the elements are balanced and the net charge is balanced. And those are net ionic equations. You will see them frequently on the AP test. Now we can start with stoichiometry.